Meanwhile, the business backlash as the Senate bill ditches a lot of important tax breaks, leaving just the spending initiative aside. Charlie Gasparino is here, the Citizens for Self-Governance president, Mark Meckler, and the Wall Street Journal senior video reporter, Shelby Holliday. Shelby, this argument that they're having, it began with the House Freedom Caucus, right? These largely conservative members who then all of a sudden had a temper tantrum. What happened here? Well,
they have a temper tantrum quite frequently. A lot of their big concerns have to do with the budget, the deficit.
They're like a bunch of Mark Mecklers, right?
But they are very coordinated. They work together, and they know how to use their leverage. Yeah. All right, so sure,
Thanks.
fine. Right. But yes, with respect to the corporate AMT, if that's what we're talking about, alternative minimum tax. There are a number of senators and representatives who are not on board with this last-minute change in the Senate bill.
Well, that was a surprise,
blindsided
right?
businesses.
Yeah.
It absolutely blindsided them. And then over the weekend, we heard they're going to ramp up their lobbying efforts to try to get it out. The problem is it's $40 billion that
and they
the Senate
need that
would have
money.
to make up for.
The other thing that was out there, Mark, was that in order to pay for that, maybe that's why the president was throwing out the idea of a higher corporate tax rate, maybe make it 22%, not 20%. Do you see this getting resolved? And to someone like you who's a real deficit hawk, what do you think of this?
I think it gets resolved because the Republicans just need to get it done. I think they're going to get all of this done before the end of the year, one way or another. They need the victory, and after all, they're all Republicans in the end. It's a mess, though. That's what I think of it. And this is what the American people think of it. You start talking about alternative minimum tax. Frankly, most regular Americans have no idea what that means. We heard about tax simplification. There's about nothing that's simple about what they're doing with taxes.
Yeah, that's what you've been saying. I mean, there's nothing simple about this. It's a mess.
Yeah. The individual side really is a joke of tax reform. And, you know, I'll say this. What's really sort of perverted about this process is that businesses and all these business groups are running to Congress to get their little tax break in there, their little loophole. The individual taxpayer in that process gets screwed. And the way this thing is set up, and again, I keep saying it, if you're a working class person or middle class person from the Midwest, okay, and you make something like $75,000 a year, something in that line, you are getting a very small income tax cut. Unless I'm missing something, an income tax cut. You pay most of your taxes on a federal level through the payroll tax. So in order to show this sort of, create this aura of a tax cut for the middle class, they're giving middle class people this tiny little tax cut. If you're in the Midwest, if you're in a high tax state and you're middle class, you make $100,000, $200,000 a year plus, you are getting hosed on this thing like there's no tomorrow.
Well, but
to pay for a corporate tax cut
that they won't budge on at 20%. I mean, they're coming down from 35. You would think there's some leeway. That's the backlash I hear from individuals is why not just bump up the corporate rate a little higher than 20%?
The AMT thing, another idea has been to just keep it for corporations, remove the possibility individuals could get ensnared. But a lot of these would be passed through businesses that would have to pay for it, who are oftentimes individuals.
When you hear about corporate AMT, you think about tech firms and these companies that invest a lot in R&D, but it also affects farmers and manufacturers, equipment makers. Right.
You know, but Neil, to the idea that folks in these high tax states are going to get killed, I agree with Charlie, but I'll be honest with you, for grassroots on the ground, and I'm one of them, I live in California, we're going to get killed. We're in favor of it.
Why?
Because these blue states need to pay the price for fiscal profligacy.
I understand that, but residents in the meantime are getting hurt badly just to make a political statement.
I don't think it's to make a political statement. I think it's to impose economic reality on the blue states. I understand,
but it's going to be years until you get a state like this to lower its taxes.
We need those kinds of adjustments in the economy.
See, I agree with you, theoretically, and I think most conservatives, particularly in these blue states, would agree with you, but the whole notion of tax reform is to close those loopholes but take the rates down. So they are really targeting, it's really a class warfare.
Isn't the argument that for all its warts and problems, for all the machinations of budget reconciliation, what it requires, this is better than nothing? I don't know if I subscribe to that view, but that's how it's been sold.
Well,
it beats what we have.
You know, listen, there's no doubt from a business standpoint that, or for a market standpoint, I just don't think factories are going to start cropping up in upstate New York because of a 20% corporate tax rate. But I think from a market standpoint, this is really good if you're an investor. The real problem is when people start doing their taxes that are in these high tax states, you know, and you're middle class. I don't care what anybody says. If you make $200 grand a year, a family of 5 in Long Island, you are not rich. You are not living like Warren Buffett. You're kind of treated like Warren Buffett in this tax plan. And again, the whole notion of tax reform is to take rates down and to close the loopholes. They are not taking the
What do you think
Well,
about
and the big question politically is how much is this going to impact Republicans? Is this going to be a keep your doctor moment where Trump has promised everyone tax cuts and then all of a sudden?
See, Shelby, that's been my argument. You should worry because you and I are in agreement here that once people be careful, Republicans, if you get what you wish for, because people aren't going to be too happy with it. I think everything's in your net paycheck.
Well,
if you don't see a big difference in that, Mark, I don't know what your thoughts are. I know you're a big fan of more money in people's hands or the government's hands. I understand that. But it won't be as much money in folks' hands as they might have thought. And I'm wondering if that boomerangs on Republicans.
Maybe, but even the net amounts we're talking, even with a more significant tax cut for the middle class, you're talking about a family making $200,000. They are middle class. I agree with you in a lot of places. You put an extra $700 in their pocket, it doesn't make a huge difference. What people want to see is, does the
I know. I think they're paying.
The question is, does the economy boom? I mean, that's what people are going to look at.
Do you think it will?
I think it's about consumer confidence, and we're seeing that rise, and I think that's important.
Well, I mean,
right. Guys, I do want, because I know Gaspard wanted me to get this in here in this segment, Nancy Pelosi. She did comment on this, and, well, we'll just take a look.
This is Armageddon. This is a very big deal because you know why? There's really a very hard way to come back from this. They take us further, more deeply into debt. What can you do but raise taxes?
Armageddon, deeper into debt. Armageddon to me is when Ponderosa runs out of the prime rib. And then you've got an Armageddon on your hands. Nevertheless, I do understand
where she's going to call nuclear war with Korea.
I don't know. That's Armageddon like on steroids.
Words can't,
but leaving aside of this whole issue, Mark, about whether she's right or wrong or just getting a little too, extreme here, you're going to hear Democrats throw this back out. You drove us into debt for this, ignoring the fact that as debt stands out, another $9 trillion will just accelerate over the next 10 years by spending, having nothing to do with the tax cuts. But what do you make of this argument that the Democrats are raising?
Well, I think it's a good argument, generally speaking, made by the Democrats. It's a joke. You never hear Democrats worry about debt. Nancy Pelosi is essentially setting the stage for a tax increase. That's what she said. They're going to have to raise taxes. So what they're looking to do is try to take over the House ultimately.